After losing all of its territory and most of its fighters, ISIL has now also lost its leader. So is the death of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi the final blow? Or will the weakened group manage to survive and continue to pursue its murderous enterprise? To discuss this, I'm joined by two experts in the field. Jessica Stern, a research professor at Boston University and co-author of ISIS, The State of Terror, and HASSAN, a director at the Center for Global Policy and co-author of ISIS Inside the Army of Terror. Thank you both for joining me in the arena. HASSAN, when Donald Trump announced Baghdadi's death on Sunday, in his usual way, he boasted about it and he claimed that he had taken down someone bigger even than Osama bin Laden. You said afterwards in an op-ed for the New York Times that Trump might be right, even if it's for the wrong reasons. For once, he might have a point. Why?
Well, because operationally, the killing of Baghdadi can be more disruptive, far more disruptive than the killing of Osama bin Laden. Because remember, when Osama bin Laden was killed in 2011, that was 10 years after 9/11. He was already kind of far removed from the reality. He was
staying in Pakistan in a compound.
Exactly. Far removed from the day-to-day reality of al-Qaeda. But he wasn't as, his killing was not as disruptive as the killing of Baghdadi today.
You're saying Baghdadi was controlling ISIS on a day-to-day basis?
He was commanding the organization very closely. He was meeting with his commanders and shaping the direction of the organization.
Jessica, you also wrote a New York Times op-ed this week, and you said that while you recognize the importance of Baghdadi to ISIL, you said, quote, jihadi leaders and even jihadi groups come and go. The US general in charge of Central Command seems to agree with you. He said this week, we don't see a bloodless future because unfortunately this ideology is going to be out there. Is this a case of an ideology being more important than the man or even the organization itself?
I think so. I mean, I do think that the killing of Baghdadi was, in fact, very significant. He was a really, truly evil man, and he killed so many people in such a gruesome, brutal way. But nonetheless, there are many groups. They keep splitting, they keep merging, and it is an ideology that has been going on for quite some time, and it apparently will continue for some time.
Hassan, you said this week that if the US and its allies failed to put pressure on ISIL now, there was, quote, a risk of ISIL quickly seizing on this vacuum in Syria and Iraq. Are you trying to say that Donald Trump should be sending more troops to Syria and Iraq rather than pulling troops out? He should be intensifying the military effort against this group?
So I am in favor of American troops staying in Syria. The whole debate about whether the Americans should stay or not should not start now. When the Americans decided to intervene on behalf of whoever in Iraq and Syria to fight this organization, the end goal should have been that after the defeat of this organization, you stay there until you make sure that it's wholly defeated, it's properly defeated, and instead of handing over these areas to the likes of Assad and so on and so forth, you make sure or you steer this situation into peace.
Jessica, how many of the socio-economic factors, the sectarian divisions that allowed ISIL to flourish in places like Iraq and Syria, how much of those factors are still around today? I mean, we have in Iraq right now protests against the government, massive corruption, security forces shooting people dead in the streets. How worried are you that the conditions are still ripe for another ISIL, for ISIL 2.0 or 3.0, however we want to define it?
I think they are ripe. I think, you know, we know that some of the risk factors for terrorism include lots of young men who are unemployed or underemployed, sectarian tensions, sectarian conflict, sectarian war. And yes, we see that. You
used to work in government back in the day. If you were advising Donald Trump today, what would you be telling him to do?
I'm not sure we're going to be able to defeat this movement, but I do think that we do need to be very careful about how we leave. Yes, maybe we need to leave over time. We cannot solve all these problems. Clearly, we often make them worse. But if we leave in a precipitous way, leaving our allies, whom we've worked with very closely, who depended on us, completely vulnerable, that strikes me as a grave error.
Jessica just mentioned a rather depressing point there in passing, that she doesn't think a group like this, or the ideology at least underpinning the group, can ever be defeated. Do you share that view?
I think the main problem today is the conflict. jihadism and extremism thrive in two things: conflict and authoritarianism in the region. The problem with that is that we always go after the disease, after the symptoms, and we leave the disease. The disease is.
But others say the disease isn't just conflict; it's the ideology, it's radical Islam, to quote the President of the United States. Where do you stand on that debate?
The ideology comes after. If you're fighting someone like the regime of Bashar al-Assad or someone like Bashar al-Assad, then jihadism provides a way for recruitment, die-hard.
Justification after the fact.
Exactly, after facts. It's not before.
So you would say that dealing with the disease is dealing with the conflicts in the region?
Precisely.
Which they haven't. Jessica, would you share that view?
I do, actually. I'm very much of the view that ideology is often a branding device more than it is something emerging. It's not the reason for the problem. It is a branding for a fight that has much more to do with the underlying sectarian tensions and authoritarian regimes. What I'm suggesting, however, that I don't believe the U.S. can defeat this or fix this problem. It's quite clear that we often make things worse.
And Hassan, ISIL this week announced a new leader, a replacement for Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who they're calling the new emir, Abu Ibrahim al-Hashimi al-Qurayshi. What do you think his life expectancy is looking like right now?
Well, so far we don't know anything about this. That doesn't, his nickname or the kunya doesn't really narrow things down. A very small number of people know who he is. The people at the top of the helm of ISIS who selected him, I don't think anybody within or below them would know. So the Iraqis probably will take some time to know who he is, and that's when we start to trace them down.
And how worried should people at home be that in the wake of Baghdadi's death, is it going to hurt the group and they get undermined and they kind of lose morale? Or is there a sense of, we're going to take revenge attacks, we've lost our territory, we've lost our leader, we're going to mount attacks in Paris or Colombo or New Delhi or Washington, D.C.?
I think most certainly they will try to wage a campaign of revenge. His decapitation is not the end for ISIS, obviously. The organization has been there before, twice actually, a very critical time, 2006 and 2010. And they survived it. And I think with the announcement this week of the new emir and his spokesperson, it seems like they handled the transition very well. And it really depends on the organization itself, and whether the Americans can go after these leaders more and more and keep the pressure.
Well, on that note, we'll leave it there. Jessica Stern, Hassan, thank you both for joining me in the arena. That's our show. Up Front will be back next week.